Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy, retired justice of the New York State Supreme Court. My parents bought a house. It was a semi-attached brick 3-bedroom house with a 1-car garage and a porch and a yard, a small backyard, and a small front garden in a neighborhood called the Hill, which was Queensboro Hill, a part of Flushing, which is right alongside the intersection of the Long Island Expressway and Main Street. And when we got there, it seemed like another world. There were a lot of trees on the street. The street was relatively quiet as compared to Union Street, where I grew up in Brooklyn. And I even saw squirrels scampering around, and I started looking for Indians. I thought maybe they would be around too. This was like the frontier compared to Brooklyn. But the fact of the matter is that wasn't the case after you got used to it. It was blue-collar neighborhood, mostly 1- and 2-family houses, modest and nice homes. Predominantly white working-class neighborhood, Italians, Irish, Germans, Hungarians, some Scandinavians, Christians, Jews, Protestants. It was outwardly quiet, but actually it wasn't as quiet as it seemed. It was just comparatively quiet because I was just entering my teens, and I found out there was quite a bit of activity as I got older. As I said before, we lived near Main Street, and we had a Main Street. It ran actually from all the way from Northern Boulevard all the way into Kew Gardens neighborhood in South Central Queens. But our stretch of Main Street was about 8 blocks long, and it included a number of stores. There were 2 supermarkets, a Bohack's, which are no longer in business, and a Conti's, which was an Italian family-owned supermarket. There were 4 bars, a Carvel drive-in stand, soft ice cream. There was a car wash. There were 3 different delicatessens, a German one, a kosher one, an Italian one. There was a luncheonette, which I later worked in, a hardware store, a liquor store, a pizzeria, and even the tiny Queensboro Hill branch of the Queens Public Library. It was right up 2 blocks away. Well, in the mid-1950s, Queensboro Hill was the site of 2 big construction projects. One of them was the Long Island Expressway, which literally ended up in our backyard. Our backyard was supposedly on Horace Harding Boulevard, and it really wasn't, because I think the people who sold the house to us probably knew the construction. They had to know that construction was coming. I don't know if my parents really knew. I would be curious to have asked them now. I never did. But maybe that's why the house was affordable. So there was a big construction going on when they were building the Long Island Expressway, just shortly after we moved there. And then there was a few blocks away, about 5 or 6 blocks away, the construction of what was then called Booth Memorial Hospital. And that excavation went on, and the construction went on for about 2 years. It's now New York Hospital Queens, or New York Presbyterian Queens. It's a very, very good hospital and an asset to the community. And in both of those excavations were big playgrounds for 10, 11, 12-year-old kids and teenagers. We would hang out in the excavations and have fights. We would have rock fights. We would throw dirt bombs at one another. We would do all kinds of stuff going on back there. And especially at the excavation of the Booth Memorial Hospital, that was a hangout. We would hang out on the top of a big dirt hill, and we'd send the biggest kid. I was in the 5th grade when we started this. We would send the tallest kid in our group out to buy a different pack of cigarettes, a different brand every day, and we'd smoke back there. I'm convinced I ended up 5'7" on my best day. I'm convinced I would have been a 6-footer had I not started smoking in the 5th grade, and the excavation at the Booth Memorial Hospital. Anyway, our block itself was 60th Avenue, and there was about 30 kids on the block, of ranging in age, the little ones and older siblings, etc. But unlike Brooklyn, you could travel to surrounding blocks without too much of a problem. It wasn't hostile like it was in Brooklyn, where there were hundreds of kids on one block, and it was self-contained. And 2 blocks away was PS 120, and PS 120 had a schoolyard. Not only did they have a schoolyard where we were from morning till night on days off, and in the summertime, they also had an after-school center open from 3 to 5, and then a night center that was open from 7 to 9 p.m. And we could be found there playing ball, every game possible, basketball, volleyball, you name it, and arts and crafts in the community center in the afternoon. And the schoolyard was our headquarters. We did everything. We played softball, stickball of every variety, handball, basketball, touch football. And the games we used to play in the street because the streets were very quiet. Unlike Brooklyn, they were not so active, and traffic was occasional, and everybody didn't have a car, and so cars sometimes they had garages and driveways, and we would play box ball, handball, stickball, anything you could do in the street, ring alivio. We had a lot of fun. It was a very, very active and good neighborhood. As I grew into my teens, I started working. My first job, I think maybe I was 12. I was a paper boy, and I would have a paper route where I delivered daily the Long Island Star Journal, which is now defunct, and on Sunday, the Long Island Press. And on Friday afternoons, it was collection time. I would have to do the whole route, stop by stop. Instead of flipping papers from my bicycle and cruising down the block, I'd have to go door to door and collect the money for the daily and Sunday paper. And in those days, I think that the typical tip was 25 cents. And you were happy to get it. And it was nice. It was nice for a young kid to my first job. And it was a good way to get a little self-esteem and to value the idea of working and earning for your labor. And the best tip I would get was right in the middle of my route. It was very, very luckily situated fortuitously. Right in the middle of the route was a woman who didn't give me a quarter, but she did give me 2 chocolate matzahs. And that was just in time, right in the middle of the route when I needed some sustenance to keep going. I would get the chocolate matzahs and look forward to that every week. And I worked in the local butcher. Was a guy named Jimmy Caggiano. I used to scrape the butcher blocks and make the sausage and do the deliveries and all of that sort of thing. I worked as a stock boy in Conti's supermarket. I then worked for 2 years in the luncheonette that I mentioned. It was known as the Greeks because some Greek guy had owned it before my time there. But when I went there, it was owned by a Jewish couple, Herbie and Blanche Grundfast, and they were just lovely people, and they sort of adopted me. I think they took a liking to me. I worked there for 2 years in high school after school, and the first thing I would do is I would find a big sink full of pots and pans that I had to wash, and then I would go out and work the counter and make things like egg creams and lime rickeys and different cherry cokes and ice cream sodas and stuff like that. And it was a good place to work because my friends would all hang out there. There was a jukebox and there were a couple of booths and people. It was like a little coffee shop and a diner. And all the local people from the stores would come there and have coffee breaks and eat. And it was a gathering place. So it was a nice place to be. We had a beat cop there, as every neighborhood did, and he was an Irishman, a good guy named Red Kelly, and he got me into boxing. He was a pretty tough guy, but he was strict, but he was a good man and a nice man. I then went to work for a Greek guy named Odysseus Vakaros, Artie Vakaros, and Artie was in the wintertime, he was a furrier. He was a seasonal worker. He worked as a furrier in the fur district, and in the summertime, he was a house painter. And he had a big clientele. He was a hardworking guy, and he took great care in doing a very, very credible artisan-like paint job. He would do a lot of sanding. It was 90% preparation, and then only 10% of the job was painting. And he even he had a big clientele in Jamaica Estates, and he did Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father's house. And Donald Trump was a little boy at that time. He was about the same age as about a year younger than I was. I never met him, but Artie did his house. And he introduced me to the beauty of the 12-hour day with the 5-minute lunch. And he used to talk to me about all the Greek songs. I learned all the Greek curse words. And I learned all the Greek songs, which are basically the same song. It's a guy leaves Greece. He's a soldier, a prisoner, or a sailor. And he misses Greece, and he misses his mother, and he misses the food. And all the Greek songs are basically the same as far as Artie is concerned. And the Hill, as we called it as a teenager, it was loaded with characters. And one of the very first characters was a big blonde-headed guy who was a bodybuilder, Billy Otts. Billy Otts was a good-looking guy, probably about 200 pounds. And as I said, he was muscular, and he drove a 10-wheel dump truck. And he was the prototype, probably 2 decades ahead of his time, of what became the Fonz on television, who was portrayed by Henry Winkler. Billy was could brag and boast and really really be funny. He was terrific. He would say things like we would be standing in front of Ardito's Pizzeria and throwing a football around, and he would say, "Cuz, make it to Carvel. Carvel is about 5 blocks away. Make it to Carvel, and I'll hit you with a short one." And that was Billy. He used to drive a big Harley Davidson full dress motorcycle, and he cut quite a figure. Another guy in the neighborhood was a guy named Junior, whose father was a plumber, and his father, Dominic, was a very, very hardworking man, and he would be an early riser. He was up at 5:30 in the morning, which meant he would go to bed at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and that meant we could so-called quote unquote steal his car, which was a 47 Buick, a standard shift, and three or four of us would go in the garage and very surreptitiously roll it down the driveway and then push it down the block. You only had to get it to 2 miles an hour, 3 miles an hour. It's a standard shift, and it would start. And we would pile 7 or 8 guys in the Buick and go cruising around. Very often we would go to White Castle, which was a big hot rod hangout on Queens Boulevard in Elmhurst. And there would be 6 or 7 of us, and we would make these gigantic orders of like 48 White Castles and 7 Coca-Colas and 6 fries. And the poor girls on roller skates who were delivering the stuff to the car windows, the waitresses, could hardly carry the tray that we ordered because there were so many of us piled in that 47 Buick, which was, huge. Junior went on to fame because he bought a hot rod when he was old enough. He bought a brand new Pontiac Bonneville, which was a 4-door, and everybody liked 2 doors in those days, but he bought a 4-door, and it was candy apple red, and we used to call it the stagecoach because it had 4 doors, but it was souped up with everything you could throw in a Pontiac engine, and he used to go drag racing with it, and he had quite a little activity, and he was known all over Queens as the stagecoach, the guy who drove the stagecoach. He later graduated. He had an ice cream truck and a route, and he ended up in Allenwood Federal Prison in New Jersey, Allenwood Farm, which was a minimum security prison. I don't know why he went there, where his tennis instructor was Jeb Magruder from Nixon White House, and he learned to play tennis, and he went on to a happy and healthy life the rest of his life after he got out. One of my friends, Freddie, an Italian-American guy, his parents were from Italy. Freddie was a radioman on the USS Saratoga, a big aircraft carrier at the time. And Freddie did a Mediterranean tour on the aircraft carrier. He was the 6th Fleet. And when he came home, he had a tattoo. I'll never forget. And he came home, and his mother saw the tattoo. It was a modest tattoo. I think maybe it had his name and a couple of waves underneath, stylized waves underneath his name. And when Freddie's mother saw it, she flipped out and got a scouring pad, Brillo, and tried to scour it off his arm. Of course, that didn't work. And she was very, very upset with Freddie, but we all laughed about that one. And then one of the other guys we had was a guy named Patty, or Patty Boy. Patty was actually Italian, and he drove a 54 Ford convertible. It was a hot rod, and he had the name of the car on the side behind the front wheel wells, and the name of the car was Salubrious. I don't think he knew what it means, but he liked the name, so he had that painted on there. And Patty had a nervous tick, and he was a madman behind the wheel. And he would get very upset if anybody cut him off on the road. And one time on the Long Island Expressway, a guy cut him off, and he got furious, and he reached in his glove compartment, pulled out a flare, lit the flare, and threw it in the guy's car. I mean, that was Patty. He was borderline nuts. And another time, he drove home with his girlfriend. Her name was Peppy. It was Patty and Peppy, and they drove home from Jones Beach to Queensboro Hill, which is probably about 35 miles. They came down the Meadowbrook Parkway, the Grand Central Parkway, to the Long Island Expressway for 35 miles in crowded beach traffic coming home, and never drove on the highway, drove on the shoulder the entire 35 miles. And that was Patty, who ended up, quite fittingly, in an all-American death. He was drunk, and he crashed into a stanchion at the Roosevelt Island Bridge, which spans Flushing Creek and connects Corona with Flushing. And Patty went flying into that about 80, 90 miles an hour and died instantly. Another one, probably the most colorful guy by anybody's account on Queensboro Hill, was Paulie the Count. And Paulie was actually Hungarian. Not the only one. There was another guy, Bobby Fedor, who was an electrician. Bobby was the greatest street fighter anybody ever saw. Bobby would fight 5 guys like other people fought 1 and have no problem winning. Bobby, once I saw him stay at home plate at PS 120 and punch a football over the left field fence, which would have been a great shot if you were playing softball, and Bobby could actually punch that ball over the fence. It was amazing. But Paulie, they called him the Count because he wore this big medallion on a chain, and he was skinny. And he idolized Billy Otts. Paulie only drove a 6-wheel dump truck, and Billy used to tell him, Paulie, Count, your truck is like you, puny. And, he would get insulted and everything else. And his best thing about him, he would say that he was called the Count because he said he was the descendant of Hungarian royalty back in Europe. And his big thing was anything but royal. He was a great thief. He would steal cars. And his big kick was to come down Main Street in a stolen car with maybe an alarm going off, and he would honk the horn, honking and everything, and he would come by, drive speed past, and wave to everybody as he went past. And I was working in the luncheonette one day, and there was a blizzard, there was a snowstorm, it was quiet out on the street, and I looked across the street at the pizzeria where Paulie the Count was working, and he was tossing the pizza up in the air, and he tossed it up in a circle, making it wider and wider, and the thing comes down and lands on his greasy head. And he just took it off nonchalant, took the pizza off, put it down on the counter, and just spread it out and continued baking the pie, unperturbed by the whole thing. He once rebuilt, because he just wanted to be like Billy Otts, he bought an old Harley Davidson and rebuilt it in his basement for the entire winter, only to find out when he had it fully assembled that it didn't fit out the door. And he had to take it apart to get it out the front door in springtime. And every winter, Paulie, it's kind of unfortunate in a way. I mean, he was great at stealing hubcaps and car parts and everything else. But every winter, on purpose, as he got older, he would get himself arrested and be sent to Rikers Island, where everybody knew him. He was a character, and he would drive the fire truck on Rikers Island. And unfortunately, he was a raging drug addict. And he ended up dying from an overdose, and he took with him Billy Otts' younger sister, who was his sweetheart, and she also overdosed with him. It was a tragic death. Well, one night, we used to sing doo-wop. I was second tenor in the group, and we had 4 guys, and we're singing. It was late at night, and we're singing in the doorway, to get an echo in Ardito's Pizzeria, and the place was closed. And it was late at night, and we got into an altercation with 4 guys who turned out to be Turks. We found out later they were Turkish exchange students at nearby Queens College. And these guys could fight, and they were half drunk, which made them hard to beat. And my Uncle Harry, who was a policeman, he saw the fight from it was a street fight. He saw the fight from his porch. And later on he commented, he said, I didn't know my nephew was such a good fighter. The fight went on for about 20 minutes. It was crazy. But we had this long, long battle. It became a minor legend in the neighborhood, and no harm was done after the whole thing was over. But 3 of the guys in the fight, Bobby Rooney died in a car accident. Another guy, Bobby Johnson, who was our first tenor in the group, he was what they call a streamer. He was a paratrooper in Fort Bragg in the Army, and on a practice jump, his chute didn't open, and they called that a streamer, and Bobby died. He was only like 20 years old when he died. And our baritone was a guy we used to call Andy the Bear. And Andy the Bear, later on, Andy was a little imbalanced, and it turned out to be true because later on in life he got in trouble for killing a guy in an argument online waiting to get into a gym in the Springfield Gardens neighborhood. Well, it was a wild neighborhood and very, very colorful place. And I myself was lucky to come of age on the Hill, and lucky not to get arrested or to die young. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.